What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved actors sits down for what should be a routine morning interview, only to have it spiral into one of the most uncomfortable moments in live television history? The atmosphere in the Good Morning America studios started pleasant enough, but within minutes, the tension between Timothée Chalamet and George Stephanopoulos became so thick you could cut it with a knife. Before we get into exactly what was said that made Timothée stand up and walk off set, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us what you think about celebrity interviews that go wrong. George Stephanopoulos opened the segment with his trademark professional smile, welcoming Timothée to the show. Timothée, great to have you here this morning. You've got a new film coming out, and obviously there's been a lot of buzz around it. But there's also been quite a bit of conversation about some of your recent statements regarding the industry. I think a lot of our viewers would love to hear you clarify some of those comments. Timothée, who had been relaxed just moments before, shifted slightly in his seat. His expression remained polite, but there was a noticeable change in his energy. Sure, George, I'm happy to talk about the film. That's what I'm here for. Of course, George continued, nodding, but you understand that when you make public statements about systemic issues in Hollywood, especially regarding representation and the way studios handle creative control, people are going to want to follow up on that. You said, and I'm quoting here, that the studio system is fundamentally broken and actively suppresses authentic voices. That's a pretty strong accusation. Timothée's jaw tightened just a fraction. It wasn't an accusation, George. It was an observation based on my experiences and the experiences of countless other people in this industry. And I think if you're going to quote me, it's important to include the full context of what I said, which was during a panel discussion about independent filmmaking versus studio productions. I'm trying to give you the opportunity to explain that context, George replied, his tone measured but with an edge, because what a lot of people heard was a young actor who has benefited tremendously from the studio system, criticizing the very machine that made him a star. There it was, the first real jab. Timothée's eyes narrowed slightly, and he leaned forward just a bit. Is that a question, or are you telling me how I should feel about my own career? George didn't miss a beat. I'm asking you to reconcile the contradiction that some people see. You've worked with major studios, you've been paid very well, you've received critical acclaim, and now you're speaking out against the system. Some might say that's convenient timing. Convenient timing, Timothée repeated, his voice still controlled, but with a sharp edge creeping in. George, I've been talking about these issues for years. Just because you're deciding to focus on it now doesn't mean it's new. And the idea that benefiting from a system means you can't critique it is frankly absurd. Should doctors not advocate for healthcare reform? Should teachers not talk about problems in education? That's a false equivalency, George countered quickly. Doctors and teachers are typically advocating for more resources and support. You're critiquing an industry that's given you everything. There's a difference. Timothée's composure was holding, but anyone watching could see the frustration building. Given me everything. George, I've worked incredibly hard for everything I've achieved. Yes, I've had opportunities, and I'm grateful for them. But that doesn't mean I can't see the problems. That doesn't mean I should stay silent when I see talented people being shut out, when I see diverse stories being watered down, when I see creative vision being compromised for market testing and safe bets. But you've been part of those quote-unquote safe bets, George pressed. You've starred in big-budget films, franchise attempts, major studio productions. Were you compromising your creative vision then? That's not what I said, and you know it. Timothée shot back, his voice rising slightly for the first time. I'm talking about a systemic issue, not my personal filmography. But since you want to make this about me specifically, let me be clear. Yes, I've made choices. Some projects I did because I believed in them completely. Some projects I did because they gave me the platform to do other work. That's the reality of building a career. But having participated in the system doesn't disqualify me from wanting to see it improve. George leaned back slightly, adjusting his position. Let's talk about your new film then, since that is why you're here. It's an independent production, correct? Much smaller budget than your recent work. Some critics are calling it self-indulgent, overly artistic for the sake of being artistic. How do you respond to that? Timothée's expression shifted to something between disbelief and frustration. Self-indulgent. It's a character study about grief and identity. The director spent 5 years developing it. We shot it in 23 days with a crew of people who believed in the story. Calling it self-indulgent because it's not a blockbuster is exactly the kind of dismissive attitude I'm talking about. I'm not dismissing it, George said, though his tone suggested otherwise. I'm simply relaying what some critics have said, and I think it's fair to ask whether this shift to smaller, more personal projects is a statement about your views on the industry, or if it's a strategic career move, Timothée repeated slowly, and there was no hiding his irritation now. George, do you hear yourself right now? I can't win in this conversation. If I do big studio films, I'm a hypocrite for criticizing the system. If I do independent films, I'm being strategic or self-indulgent. What exactly would satisfy you? I'm not trying to satisfy anything, Timothy. I'm asking questions that I think our viewers want answered. Questions about consistency, about authenticity. You've built your brand on being different, on being the thoughtful alternative to typical Hollywood stars. But increasingly, it seems like there's a gap between that image and the reality. Timothy's hands, which had been resting calmly on the armrests of his chair, now gripped them slightly. My brand? George, I'm not a product. I'm an actor. I'm a person. And I'm someone who cares about the work and about the industry being better. If you want to frame that as calculated or inconsistent, that says more about your perspective than it does about me. I think our viewers can judge that for themselves. George replied coolly. But let's talk about something specific. There's been reporting about tension on the set of your last major studio film. Sources say you clashed repeatedly with the director over the script, over your character's direction. Some people interpreted that as you trying to exert control beyond your role as an actor. Is that fair? This was clearly unexpected. Timothy's face showed genuine surprise, then anger. I don't know what sources you're referring to, but that's a completely distorted version of what happened. Yes, I had conversations with the director about the character. That's called collaboration. That's called caring about the work. Framing that as me being difficult or power-hungry is not only inaccurate, it's a tactic that's been used to diminish actors, particularly younger actors, who dare to have opinions about their own work. So you deny that there was tension? George pushed. I didn't say that, Timothy responded sharply. Of course, there was tension. Making a film is hard. Creative collaboration involves disagreement. But characterizing that as me clashing with people or trying to take over is dishonest. And honestly, George, I'm starting to wonder what the point of this interview is. I came here to talk about a project I care deeply about, and instead you're throwing these kinds of questions at me. George's expression remained neutral, professional. The point is to have a conversation, an honest conversation, and part of that means asking difficult questions. Difficult questions are fine, Timothy said, his voice tight. But these aren't difficult questions, George. These are gotcha questions. These are questions designed to make me look bad, no matter how I answer them, and I'm not interested in playing that game. The tension in the studio was palpable now. The camera operators and crew members were exchanging glances, unsure if they should intervene or let this play out. George, to his credit, maintained his composure entirely. I understand you're frustrated, but I think you're being overly sensitive to legitimate questions about your public statements and your career choices. Overly sensitive, Timothy said, and he actually laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's interesting. So now we're adding that to the list. I'm a hypocrite, I'm strategic, I'm difficult, and I'm overly sensitive. Anything else you want to add? Timothy, I think you're reading into this more than no. Timothy interrupted, his voice firm. I'm reading this exactly right, George, and I think we're done here. He didn't move yet, but the statement hung in the air like a challenge. George's eyebrows raised slightly. We still have several minutes left in the segment. Then I guess you'll have to fill them yourself. Timothy responded. The confrontation was reaching a breaking point, and neither man seemed willing to back down. George maintained his professional demeanor, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. Timothy, I think you're overreacting. We're having a conversation. This is what interviews are. No, George, this is what ambush journalism is, Timothy replied, his voice steady but intense. And I'm not going to sit here and let you twist everything I say into something negative. I came here in good faith to talk about a film that means something to me. That means something to a lot of people who worked on it. And you've turned this into some kind of character assassination. Character assassination. George's tone sharpened. I've asked you about your own public statements and your own actions. If you can't handle questions about things you've actually said and done, then maybe you need to think more carefully about what you put out into the world. Timothy's face flushed slightly. I can handle questions, George. What I can't handle, what I won't handle, is the way you're framing everything. You're not looking for answers. You're looking for me to either defend myself in a way that makes me look defensive or back down in a way that makes me look weak. It's a setup, and it's beneath what I thought this show was supposed to be. The studio had gone completely quiet except for their voices. The other Good Morning America hosts, who were off camera, had stopped their conversations. Everyone was watching this unfold in real time. George leaned forward slightly. Timothy, let me be very direct with you. You're a talented actor. No one disputes that. But you're also young, and sometimes young people in this industry confuse their personal frustrations with systemic problems. You've had disagreements with directors. You've chosen to do smaller films. And now you're framing all of that as some brave stand against the establishment. But from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're trying to control a narrative about yourself that might not match reality. Timothy stared at him for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. That's incredibly patronizing. George, telling me I'm too young to understand the difference between my personal experiences and systemic issues. I'm not a child. I've been working in this industry for over a decade. I've seen how it works. I've seen what happens to people who don't fit the mold. So don't sit there and tell me I'm confusing my personal frustrations with the bigger picture. So you're a martyr now, George said, and there was no mistaking the sarcasm in his voice. That was the moment. Timothy's entire body language changed. He sat back in his chair, and his face went from frustrated to something colder, more resolved. You know what, George? I really tried to have this conversation with you in good faith. But you're not interested in that. You're interested in scoring points. You're interested in making me look foolish. And I'm done. We're not finished with the interview, George said, and for the first time, there was a note of something other than confidence in his voice. Maybe concern about how this was playing out on live television. Yeah, we are, Timothy said, and this time he did stand up. Not quickly, not dramatically, but deliberately. I'm not going to sit here and be insulted. I'm not going to be talked down to, and I'm not going to give you any more footage to edit into whatever narrative you want to create. George remained seated, but his posture stiffened. Timothy, I think you're making a mistake. Walking off an interview because you don't like the questions is not a good look. Timothy was already unclipping his microphone. You know what's not a good look, George? What you've done here today, inviting someone on your show under the pretense of talking about their work, and then spending the entire time trying to tear them down. That's not journalism. That's entertainment at someone else's expense. I'm doing my job, George insisted, his voice rising slightly for the first time. Your job is to inform people, not to create conflict for ratings, Timothy countered, setting his microphone on the chair. And if you can't see the difference, then I feel sorry for you. I really do. George stood up now too, and there was tension in every line of his body. You're walking away because you can't handle criticism. That's what people are going to see. They're going to see a young actor who can dish it out but can't take it. Timothy paused, turning back to face George directly. The cameras were still rolling, capturing every second of this. Let them think what they want. I know why I'm walking away. I'm walking away because I have enough self-respect not to participate in this. I'm walking away because I refuse to play the game you're trying to force me into. And I'm walking away because I actually care about the things I've been talking about. And I'm not going to let you reduce them to some petty argument about my ego or my career. Those are nice words, George said, and his professional mask was slipping now, showing real frustration underneath. But actions speak louder than words. And your action right now is to run away. I'm not running, George. I'm choosing not to engage with someone who's made it clear they have no interest in a real conversation. I'm choosing not to waste any more of my time or energy on this. And honestly, I'm choosing to respect your audience enough not to subject them to another 20 minutes of you trying to bait me and me defending myself against accusations that aren't based on anything real. There was a moment of silence. The crew didn't know what to do. This was live television. They couldn't cut away without making it obvious something had gone very wrong. George's face was flushed now, his composure finally cracking. You think you're taking some kind of moral high ground here, but all you're doing is proving my point. You can't handle being challenged. You can't handle someone pushing back on your narrative. So you're leaving? Timothy's expression was hard to read now, a mixture of anger and something like disappointment. You keep saying, I can't handle being challenged. But George, you haven't challenged me. You've attacked me. There's a difference. A challenge would be asking me how I plan to make a real difference. What specific changes I'd like to see, what I'm doing beyond just talking. An attack is questioning my motives, my character, my right to even have an opinion in the first place. You chose to attack, and I'm choosing not to accept that. I asked you substantive questions about your contradictions and your approach, George protested. No, you didn't, Timothy said firmly. You asked loaded questions designed to make me look bad. You framed everything I've said in the worst possible light. You brought up anonymous sources about on-set tension without giving me any real information to respond to. You called me oversensitive, entitled, hypocritical. You suggested I was too young to understand my own experiences. That's not journalism, George, and deep down, I think you know that. George opened his mouth to respond, but Timothy held up a hand. I'm not interested in continuing this argument. I've said what I needed to say. I hope your audience sees this for what it is. I hope they ask themselves whether this is the kind of interview they want to watch. Whether this is the kind of discourse that actually helps anyone. And I hope that maybe, just maybe, this will make someone think twice about the way we talk about people who are trying, even imperfectly, to make things better. He turned to leave, and this time he actually started walking toward the exit. George called after him, his voice carrying across the studio. Timothy, if you walk off this set, you're going to face serious consequences. This is a contract obligation. This is a professional commitment. Timothy stopped, but he didn't turn around. His voice, when he spoke, was clear and calm. Then let there be consequences. George, some things are worth it. And with that, he walked off the Good Morning America set, leaving George Stephanopoulos standing alone, facing the cameras, with a live show to somehow salvage. We're not finished with the interview, George said, and for the first time, there was a note of something other than confidence in his voice. maybe concern about how this was playing out on live television. "Yay, we are," Timothy said, and this time he did stand up. Not quickly, not dramatically, but deliberately. "I'm not going to sit here and be insulted. I'm not going to be talked down to. And I'm not going to give you any more footage to edit into whatever narrative you want to create." George remained seated, but his posture stiffened. "Timothy, I think you're making a mistake. Walking off an interview because you don't like the questions is not a good look." Timothy was already unclipping his microphone. "You know what's not a good look, George? What you've done here today, inviting someone on your show under the pretense of talking about their work, and then spending the entire time trying to tear them down. That's not journalism. That's entertainment at someone else's expense." George stood up now too, and there was tension in every line of his body. "You're walking away because you can't handle criticism. That's what people are going to see. They're going to see a young actor who can dish it out but can't take it." Timothy paused, turning back to face George directly. The cameras were still rolling, capturing every second of this. "Let them think what they want. I know why I'm walking away. I'm walking away because I have enough self-respect not to participate in this. I'm walking away because I refuse to play the game you're trying to force me into." There was a moment of silence. The crew didn't know what to do. This was live television. They couldn't cut away without making it obvious something had gone very wrong. George's face was flushed now, his composure finally cracking. "You think you're taking some kind of moral high ground here, but all you're doing is proving my point. You can't handle being challenged, so you're leaving." Timothy's expression hardened. "You haven't challenged me, George. You've attacked me. There's a difference. A challenge would be asking me how I plan to make a real difference. An attack is questioning my motives, my character, my right to even have an opinion. You chose to attack, and I'm choosing not to accept that." He turned to leave, and this time he actually started walking toward the exit. His movements were calm, controlled, but there was no mistaking the finality in them. George called after him, his voice carrying across the studio. "Timothy, if you walk off this set, you're going to face serious consequences. This is a contract obligation." Timothy stopped, but he didn't turn around. "Then let there be consequences. George, some things are worth it. This is going to follow you." George pressed, taking a step forward. "This is going to be the story, not your film, not your message. Is that really what you want?" Timothy turned his head slightly. "What I want is to work with people who care about the craft, who treat each other with respect. If the price of that is walking away from interviews like this one, then yes, that's exactly what I want." George's jaw tightened. "You're being dramatic. This is a morning talk show interview." "Maybe not to you," Timothy replied, "but to me, it matters. How we talk to each other matters. The fact that you think this is just entertainment, just another segment, that's exactly the problem I've been talking about." The studio was completely silent now. Even the crew members who had been trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy had stopped moving. George's voice dropped lower. "You're making a fool of yourself. People are watching this. Millions of people, and what they're seeing is someone who can't handle a tough interview. They're seeing someone who won't tolerate being disrespected." Timothy corrected. "I'm okay with people seeing me draw a line. Maybe that makes me difficult. Maybe that makes me sensitive. But at least I can look at myself in the mirror." George shook his head. "This is career suicide. You're throwing everything away over one interview." Timothy actually smiled at that, but it was a sad smile. "If my career can't survive me having principles, then maybe it's not a career worth having. And if you think standing up for myself is career suicide, that says more about this industry than it does about me." He turned again and started walking, and this time he didn't stop. His footsteps echoed in the silent studio as he headed toward the exit. Just before Timothy reached the door, George called out one more time. "The film you came here to promote. You realize no one's going to care about it now. All anyone will remember is this." Timothy paused at the door, his hand on the handle. He didn't turn around this time. He just spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. If people care more about this than about the work itself, then they were never going to care about the film anyway. At least this way, they saw something real. And with that, he pushed open the door and walked out, leaving George Stephanopoulos standing alone in the middle of the Good Morning America set. Camera still rolling, a live show derailed, and no idea how to recover. The camera operators kept filming for another few seconds, capturing George's face as he processed what had just happened. Then someone in the control room finally cut to commercial, and the studio erupted into chaos. So what did we just witness? Was this a justified stand against hostile journalism? Or was it an overreaction from someone who couldn't handle tough questions? Did George Stephanopoulos cross a line, or was he simply doing his job as a journalist? And what does this mean for how we conduct celebrity interviews, for how we talk about people who speak up about industry problems, for the relationship between media and the people they cover? Make sure to subscribe and drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Timothy was right to walk off, or should he have stayed and finished the interview? Let us know what you think.